Hi everyone, I'm Bharath, a member of Team Singapore. This video is part of a series on how to do certain debate fundamentals. This video is going to be about the principles for taking apart a motion. Before I start, I just want to note that there's no particular hard and fast way to do this, and that each team is different and obviously has different dynamics. This video is just going to comprise a few of the ways that our team approaches each motion to try and systematize how our preparation works. So don't feel the need to necessarily follow all the steps here. Approaching a motion in an impromptu setting and in a prepared debate are different tasks. In a prepared debate, you have time to research, you have time to have a long discussion, etc. But in an impromptu debate, the focus is on getting a case out under time pressure and crucially, making sure everyone on the team is crystal clear about what you're going to win the debate on later down the line. This video is going to mainly focus on the principles of taking apart a motion in an impromptu setting. So just on a few thinking models to generate arguments quickly and to know what needs to be defended. Some of this may be applicable to prepared motions as well. So first, when we see a motion, we like to identify the type of motion you are dealing with. There are different types of motions. Some are policy motions, like this house will legalize all drugs, or this house will ban hate speech. In this type of motions, the proposition team has to defend a particular policy as a change away from status quo. There are also evaluative debates, such as this house regrets the rise of social media as a primary news source, which speak about an event and decide whether that had done more good or more harm. In general, this house would indicate that it's a policy debate, but I would encourage you to express caution with this, as often policy debates can be phrased as this house believes that or this house supports motions as well. So this moves us on to the second step, deciding what you need to defend in a particular debate. And here you decide on your own team's burden of proof, which is really important in directing where your arguments are going to go. So in a proposition team, the proposition needs to defend either a policy or a version of the world depending on whether it's a policy or an evaluative debate. It's slightly more complicated for the opposition team. In an evaluative debate, you are stuck with status quo or a counterfactual world, for example, in which the rise of social media had or had not taken place. But for a policy debate, opposition often has a choice on whether to run status quo or whether to defend a counterprop. If they defend status quo, you need to explain as to why status quo is more preferable than the policy or proposition. But many op teams also choose to run counter policies in which they also have a new legislation to differ from status quo, but one that is different from what the motion is proposing. For example, in this house will legalize all drugs, opposition does not necessarily have to stick to status quo, nor are they allowed to legalize all drugs. So for example, they could do something like increasing restrictions on drugs, or increasing regulations, or having more funding for enforcement bodies like the DEA, for example. This moves us on to the third step, on deciding what your world looks like and what are the intrinsic characteristics of your side. Often when we look at motions, we like to decide what is symmetrical and asymmetrical on both sides of the house. Symmetrical things refer to arguments that both sides can claim to have, whereas asymmetrical refers to intrinsic characteristics to the motion that can only be claimed by your side of the house. Driving arguments or things intrinsic to your side is really important because it prevents the opposing team from just simply swallowing your arguments. The final step is to think of real-life examples of this debate. Often examples are super useful to generate ideas because often this is even a controversial issue because there are certain good examples for both sides. Beware of example-driven arguments and note that there always must be logic behind the argument, but thinking of the example is a useful way to come up with this logic in the first place. So these are the basic steps on how our team likes to break down a motion. I'm now going to take you through an example. The motion I'm going to talk about is this house would force all pharmaceutical companies to run as non-profits in times of global disease epidemics. So first, this is a policy motion. So as a prop team, I would think that I have to defend a policy. The next step is to decide what our world looks like. So obviously I would do some sort of explaining in the first proposition speech as to what is going to happen to these companies, who is going to pay their workers, for example, and think about these things in prep. Thirdly, you would decide what are the characteristics intrinsic to your side. The reflex in this debate might be just to claim, well, we reduce prices of essential life-saving drugs. But note that that's not necessarily an intrinsic characteristic, because opposition can just as easily run a policy on having price regulations, for example, without necessarily making them non-profits. So in this debate, you need to focus on the characteristics that are intrinsic to your side, like the idea of pharmaceutical companies not having lots of profits to invest, for example. Finally, I would think of real-life examples of this motion. For example, this has been a debate with the prevalence of cheap knockoff fake drugs in places like Vietnam and India. And this can lead me on to an argument about how the specific profit incentive for these companies encourages them to do such behavior. So this is just one example of how you can apply the steps here to generate your arguments into a case. I hope this video has been useful. Thank you for listening and continue to enjoy debating.